Hello, and thank you for joining us today. Educators all over the world are rapidly transitioning to learning online, some for the very first time. AWS and Amazon put together a webinar series for educators by educators who have expertise in online learning. Today, we have Garry Smolyansky, who is a professional learning consultant and professor at Seneca College in Ontario, Canada. Garry's going to talk all about teaching online for beginners. Before we get started, know that you are all muted, but we want to hear from you. Please use the question pane on the GoToWebinar control panel to communicate with us. We will answer your questions as we go along, and we'll also have time at the end dedicated to Q&A. Now, I'd like to introduce you to Garry Smolyansky.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Teaching Online for Beginners with myself, Garry Smolyansky. Pleasure to have you here. Thanks for joining us. We're going to start off today with 3 truths in a line. This is an easy, engaging strategy that you can use with your students as well. So below are 4 statements, which I will read out. And what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to select the one that you think is false. Please type your choice number into the Q&A window. Statement number 1, online learning can be just as engaging as face-to-face learning. Number 2, TPACK is one theory we can use to support online learning. Number 3, anyone can teach online with the proper tools and supports. Number 4, teaching online is impersonal and doesn't let you develop relationships. Please make your selection in the next 30 seconds and type your choice into the Q&A window of which statement is false. As you might have guessed, the false statement is number 4. Teaching online doesn't have to be impersonal. And of course, you can develop relationships with your students. They will look a little bit different than what you would in face-to-face, but it is possible. Our learning goal for the day is to introduce you, the participant, to best practices in online teaching. And this is going to be a very high-level overview of one major theory that we use for teaching, both online and offline. We will be looking at the online lens today. And at the end of our time together, we'll come back to the learning goal to be accountable and see if we've reached it or not. Our agenda today is short and sweet. We'll begin with the introductions. Topic 1 will cover the framework of what TPACK is. And topic number 2 will dive into the details and the elements. In part 3, we're going to be looking at what we've learned and the next steps. And of course, we'll have some time at the end for questions and answers. You are most welcome to follow along, as I've made a PDF version of this slideshow available to you through the link below on the bottom of the page. And of course, all the links there are live, so you'll be able to follow along, take notes, and go to the same pages that I'm going to. So a little bit about me. My name is Garry Smolyansky, and I'm a professional learning consultant and professor at Seneca College. And of course, I have been teaching online for just over 10 years. It brings me such joy when I get to work with other educators, and we have that amazing synergy that happens when we throw ideas back and forth. And although this is a one-way conversation today, you are most welcome to participate through the Q&A, and we will do our very best to collaborate in real time, and we'll have an opportunity to do a deeper dive during office hours. Of course, if you have any questions directly to me, you can always email me, and my email is right at the bottom of the page. So now it's your turn. Please introduce yourself, your name, and where you're from in the question and answer window. We'll give you about 30 seconds to do that. We'll just love to know who is coming to us from where. Wonderful, folks. Thank you so much for sharing your name and where you're from. Welcome to everybody. So section 1 is going to take us through the framework, how things are built. And we're going to be really taking this time to understand the model of TPACK and how it creates engaging and balanced learning online and offline. So is anybody familiar with TPACK? Some yes, some no. Well, if you take a look at this image, which comes from tpack.org, it's the source site for the theory and the person who put it together, it looks complicated. If this is the first time you're seeing it, you have 3 overlapping circles that create an interesting Venn diagram, and then you have this permeable outer shell and lots of labeling. So don't be overwhelmed, because I found a way to simplify it. So we're going to break this down into 2 parts. First, we'll take a look at the individual pieces, and then we're going to start overlapping them and seeing what they are, and go for a deeper dive in the next section. Here we go. This is a video created by Candace R for the website, and it takes us through both of those elements of the building blocks and how things overlap. So enjoy.
Here's TPACK in 2 minutes. For more information, visit tpack.org. So first we have to ask, what is it? Well, TPACK is a framework that combines 3 knowledge areas: our technological knowledge, content knowledge, and our pedagogical knowledge. And it looks at how they work together to increase student motivation and to make the content more accessible to students. We look at the content as the what. It's the subject matter we're teaching, like ecology, music, algebra, health, geometry, or art history, to name a few. Then we look at our pedagogical knowledge. It's the how. Every teacher has tools, so let's put them to use. Are we going to be using direct instruction? Will this be inquiry-based, group discussions? How are we going to make the content more accessible by the way we present it to our students? Then we look at selecting the appropriate technology, because it's the partner. What tool will we select to make the content more accessible to the students while supporting the pedagogical strategy which we've identified will help to deliver this information to students? We must identify those support features to really help us use technology to reach our outcomes.
Thank you, Candace. That was really great. So we have our 3 elements, right? Our content, our pedagogy, and our technology. And just to build on Candace's point, it's very important that we do them in order. So we always start with the content, what you're teaching. Then, once we figure that out, we talk about the pedagogy, or if you're teaching adults, the andragogy. How are you going to teach it? Those 2 used to be enough. But what we'd like to argue is that enhancing it with other tools, and technology can be anything from a pencil and paper to a very sophisticated application, engages students even further, where content and pedagogy are going to be built on with technology. But technology is always, in our case, the last piece. It's not what we rely on, it's what we embellish with. So let's look at how things start overlapping. Candace is going to take us through that again as we bring it all together.
As we understand them individually, we can start to see overlaps. Our TP knowledge allows us to understand how we're making the content more accessible. Our TC knowledge allows us to identify the affordances of pairing the appropriate technology to the content. And our PC knowledge allows us to identify the affordances of pairing the appropriate pedagogical strategies with the content. TPACK comes from the overlapping in that center spot, or as we refer to it as the sweet spot, when all 3 knowledge areas work together. It's crucial to remember that surrounding this is the context. That's you and your students. This may look differently when you walk into classrooms, because at the heart of TPACK is meeting students' needs.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Candace. And of course, if you'd like to see the full video, we have it available by the link here, and that is posted on YouTube and linked to tpack.org for you to learn even more about our theory. So what Candace pointed out is the overlap, and ideally, you want to be using all 3 at the same time. And then what does TPACK stand for? It's technological, pedagogical, and content knowledge. That's what TPACK stands for. And what we want to do is we want to try to combine all three as often as we can, and it is possible. It's a 3-step process as you plan, and of course, you always keep context in mind. So after viewing the video, I would love you to tell me in 6 words, no more, no less, and we'll call this a 6-word story, what TPACK means to you. It doesn't have to be a sentence, folks. 6 words in a 6-word story that describes what TPACK is to you. And if you can post that in the Q&A window, as you consider the image on the screen, I'll give you about 40 seconds to do that. Thank you. Folks, thanks so much for sharing your 6-word stories in our Q&A window. Seems like TPACK means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. And this is one of my absolute favorite educational theories to use. And I actually use it in everything I do in terms of planning because it has just made things really simple and really clear, but at the same time, very open and very mobile. So it can be used across contexts quite easily. That's our first section. So hopefully you have a basic understanding of what TPACK is and that it's a great way to create learning online and offline, perhaps a way to enhance or embellish your own methodology. So let's dive into section 2. We're going to take a look at some of the details, and I'm going to give you some very specific recommendations of what you can do to use TPACK to empower your teaching online. Now, whether it's something that you've done for years or something you are just trying out for the first time, I find that TPACK is a nice, comfortable, structured way to plan your online teaching. And of course, this is a high-level overview, so we won't be looking at specific platforms and specific tools. Those will come at later webinars. We are just looking at the big idea, the shell, the big theory. So remember that I said that content is what we always start with. So I want to ask you, what topics are you teaching to your students right now, or what topics are coming up? Please take a moment and share your answer in the Q&A window. Fantastic. Thank you for sharing that. So I would ask 3 questions as you're thinking about what you're teaching. The what is very important. More specifically, what do you want students to learn? Every topic has so many things that each student can receive. And of course, in the age of the internet and specifically online teaching, the internet really has a vast array of information. So your criteria, or really your learning goals of what you want your students to learn, is how you laser focus their attention onto very specific things that have been determined as important. Not everything is important. And your professional judgment decides the most important things that you believe they need to know in the limited time, using the limited energy they have. So that's the first question I would ask myself as I prepare my content knowledge for online teaching. What do you want your students to learn? I would layer that on with skills. So the content is very important, but we also want them to learn skills as they go through. Here's an example. If you want your students to learn about animals and you want them to practice effective online searching, that's a skill paired with content. So you could design an assignment around, I'd like you to find 3 reliable sources that talk about your favorite animal, and then proving how those sources are reliable. So we're combining a skill with content. And whenever you can do that, that's effective, because what we want to do is we don't want to just have students looking for information. We want them to practice the skill of searching and filtering as they're looking for a specific piece of information, online or offline. And then, of course, the third question is your role. You don't have to be the sage on the stage. You don't have to have knowledge of everything, but how will you guide the learning? So you are the guide on the side. You are the facilitator of learning, especially in an online environment where you could have students joining you either in real time or doing it at their own pace. So how are you organizing the learning? And that is very, very different than face-to-face because you have, I would say, less control in some things and more control in other things. So it's very, very important that you establish your role as the guide. You are the guide to learning, and you are going to be directing them to the pathways that they should be embarking on. And then they go off and do the learning and then come back to you and report to you. So at the bottom here, I've added a learning goals and success criteria link, which I will take you to. And of course, Harvard University has a great little piece about learning goals and success criteria. And I would highly recommend that you take a look at it just as a quick refresher about how to set effective learning goals and success criteria. We've talked about content. We got that. We know what we're teaching. Now the pedagogical knowledge. Never assume your students are interested in what you have to teach. That is a lesson that I learned the hard way right at the beginning of my teaching. I assumed that because I'm a teacher and I've been given a class, they should automatically listen. And you are really setting yourself up to fail if that's what you believe. You earn the interest, you build the relationship, but you still have to work so hard every time that you begin exploring a new concept. The key to capturing student interest right from the start and then holding it is, well, it's a classroom management strategy, and it also helps motivate students to learn. So I would love for you to think about what we've done so far in this presentation and think about one strategy that I've used that has helped you. So share your answer in the question and answer window. Thank you. Just take a couple of moments to do that. Now, some of you were very wise to keep reading the slide, and you can see that some of the strategies that I've used are actually listed here. So number one is 3 truths and a lie. You remember how we started our slideshow? I introduced myself quickly, and then I gave you a task to consider right away. Well, as the quicker I can put you to work, the more engaged you're likely to be, especially at the start. It's very, very important that we do something unexpected. What are our students expecting us to do? When we start teaching, most of them are expecting us to start talking. However, if we give them a task or a challenge right away, that puts the onus of learning onto them. They're not listening passively, they are engaging actively in discussion. 3 truths and a lie is a very, very, very easy strategy that can be used in any subject, any grade level, and really most situations, as long as you're using things that are common knowledge. So you want to set up people for success. 3 truths and a lie, you saw an example of it at the start. I'm sure that you could easily replicate it. Our 6-word story is an interesting strategy. And if you remember at the end of our TPACK explanation videos, I asked you to use 6 words, no more, no less, to describe what something meant to you. So a 6-word story is a summarizing exercise, and it forces people to choose what's important. When you only have 6 words as opposed to 10 or 20 or unlimited amounts of words, you really have to be very selective about what is important to you. Which brings up the question, how do we decide what is important? So that's a skill that we can teach. 6-word story is a great way to get an idea very quickly about what students have understood from your lesson. And what I do is it's usually a concluding activity of a section or of the lesson, and it just lets me get a quick understanding of where people are at. You can read 6 words in, 2 to 3 seconds. So it's a very quick way to overview things. And of course, the third instructional strategy to engage your learners is questions and pausing. So you'll notice that I don't talk, or I try not to talk for very long, because once you get past a certain point, even if they're super interested, I think after about 2 to 3 minutes, people start tuning out because your voice just keeps going and going. And that's fine. I don't take that personally if people are doing other things as well, but I'm fighting for attention. So questions which force you to participate or invite you really to participate, because you can't force people online that much. And then the pauses. So you'll notice that every time I pause, it basically resets the listeners. Why did he stop talking? What's going on? It builds a little bit of suspense, but it also pulls people back in. It's a very easy way. And you'll notice that I'm really, really trying hard not to use any air filters as well. So no ums or uhs or ahs or buts. I'd rather just pause. If I don't have something to say, I just stop. You might be thinking, this is great. 3 truths and a lie, 6-word story, questions and pauses. Yeah, you've given me everything I need. My friends, there is so much more. A great resource that I highly recommend is Discovery Education. They've got an insane amount of instructional strategies available to you. And if you're subscribed to Discovery Education through your district, that's great. But if you're not, there is this public-facing page called Spotlights on Strategies, SOS. And they have an array of instructional strategies created by teachers for teachers. I use these all the time. I have 2 or 3 that I love. Guess which ones they are. 3 truths and a lie, 6-word story. And then every once in a while, I try to take something new. What this does is it takes what I'm teaching and it helps me capture my students' interest. So it makes the learning a lot more dynamic and it makes the content a lot more easy for them to access because they're excited about engaging with it. Now, some might say, okay, well, that's enough. You've got content and pedagogy. What more do we need? I would argue that you need, in the 21st century, technological knowledge. We want to teach our students to be as proficient with technological tools as possible. They teach themselves a lot of this. It is important, though, that we give them meaningful ways to use the tools, to look for things, to engage with learning, and use the tools, as we can say, for good and not for evil. So I want to ask you, what methods will you be using to conduct your virtual learning? As I'm sure many of you have been asked to transform your face-to-face or hybrid courses into fully online, considering the time we're at. Please take a few moments to share your answers in the Q&A window. Thank you so much. And you can continue sharing. I just wanted to make sure that we keep this show going. So here are 3 questions to consider as you think about the last piece of TPACK. So what's available? Do you know what online platforms your school or institutions use? Is there more than one? Do you have a choice? Is there one you're more comfortable with? Is there one that will make your work easier? You really want to shop around and explore your options, especially if you have more than one choice, because what you do now, you can reuse. And what you don't want to be stuck doing is putting a lot of effort in creating things now and then not being able to use them later because you've picked the platform that is least popular or where the license will run out in half a year or a year. So make sure you do your research before you select your online platform if you have more than one to select. Then, how will your students communicate with you and collaborate with you? You want to pick a platform, again, if you have a choice, that allows you to do these things as easily and as nimbly as possible. If you are assigned to a platform, then you want to be very clear about what is the best way, because there's often more than one way to communicate and collaborate on a lot of current platforms. So these are things that you really want to know. Channels of communication need to be open, and collaboration. Remember, that is how we are building relationships. Just as important is number 3. Can your students communicate and collaborate with each other? The less barriers there are to them working together and talking, the easier it's going to be for you, because each barrier that's put up is something that you're going to have to mediate, is something that's going to be discouraging for them. So the easier they can do things and the more ways there are to access communication and collaboration, the more effective your students can be, the richer the work can be, and the process can go forward without as much support from you always, right? You're going to be there at the start quite a bit, but then you can gradually release if they have really figured out an effective way of how to work and collaborate together. Now, if you don't know very much about all these things, you can go and check out my colleague's website, Tech Tips 411. This is Jen Hall. She's a fantastic tech coach down in the States. Her website is fantastic. It's really the go-to place for me for any tech tools that I want to learn about. Very easy to navigate, and Jen's got years of experience and lots of resources. So I highly recommend that you check that out. And that brings us to the end of section 2. So hopefully, by taking a look at specific examples in each part of TPACK, you can see that online teaching is just a couple of questions away. Okay? The answers to those questions will help you move forward. So where were we and where are we going to go? Believe it or not, just about 25 minutes ago, we looked at this item together and we went through introductions. We covered all 3 topics, and hopefully you've been keeping up with your own version of the slideshow. And if you missed the start and you're just tuning in now, you can grab your own copy of this slide deck with this URL. These will be archived, so you're welcome to come back and replay them later as well. I promised you we'd come back to this, and I like to keep my promises. So did we achieve our learning goal, which was to introduce participants to best practices in online teaching? Please take just a couple of moments to let us know in the Q&A window. Thank you, folks. Thank you very much. Our learning goal sometimes is achieved, sometimes it's not achieved, and especially if it's a little bit open-ended, like the one here, some people might say yes, some people might say no, but then that's a piece of assessment that we can take and then plan ahead based on our feedback. So in the window, I would love for you to tell me, you've heard about TPACK, you've heard about the specific things you can do in each one of them. So what are you going to do now, right? I'd love for you to, and I'm forcing you to pick what's important by using a 6-word story, and in the Q&A window, please share your next steps with us. And I'm sure that your next steps will inspire and give ideas to other people as well. So take a moment, go ahead and share your next steps with us. Thank you so much. So lots of ideas here. And what we'd like to do is we'd like to take the next little while to do just an open Q&A time, right? What I've been doing is I've been prompting you with questions and I've been directing the conversation. Perhaps you didn't feel that you had an opportunity to raise your hand and ask a question that was on your mind that maybe I didn't cover. This is your opportunity. So please, any questions that you have, any feedback, anything you want to share, this is the time. And what we will do is we will do our best to answer your questions or redirect you to the proper resources. I also want to point out that you can click here to learn more about our webinar series, which is going and going and going. And of course, we've got lots of great speakers as well as learning office hours. So if you want to go for a really deep dive you can click here and then take a look at the office hours. Now, of course, if you're watching this recording after it's been made, that might not be exactly the case. So just check in and see if this is still in effect. But this is your one-stop shop to find out more about our webinar series as it's running live. Folks, let the questions and answers begin. Thanks for your time, and I look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you, Garry. That was really fantastic. We really appreciate hearing your perspective and best practices for a move to online instruction. If you have any questions, please ask through the questions pane on the GoToWebinar control panel. If we do not get to your question, or you want to dive deeper, you can register for office hours by going to the link on the screen. You can also find and register for more webinars about the transition to online learning by going to the link we'll post in the chat. New webinar topics and dates are added each Monday. Garry, I know you've been seeing a lot of questions coming in here. Are there some ones you want to kind of take right off the bat and address? Or there's some ones that you want to point out in the, I know you've been answering them in the question pane, but are there some you want to address with the whole group?
Yeah, Mike, thank you so much. And just wanted, before I begin addressing any questions, just thank everybody for their participation, for being here and making the time and making this a priority. So I will start with one question that comes to us. And it's a great question. It says, can you give an example of a lesson using all three parts of TPACK? And I would say that the presentation that you just witnessed, the webinar, is TPACK created. I actually used TPACK to put the presentation together. So the content was the online, well, teaching online for beginners. And as I was going through it and through the different sections of it, I made sure that I knew the content that I was going to be addressing in, let's say, the introduction or part 1 or part 2 or 3. And then I paired that with an instructional strategy. So you would have seen in the introduction, we start by just giving some general information. That's the content. Then we pair it with an instructional strategy, which was 3 truths and a lie. And then, of course, the technology that we used to deliver it was the PowerPoint presentation alongside with the webinar software. So this was meant to be a presentation about TPACK using TPACK to actually design it. So I try to sprinkle as many best practices in there as possible and model it for you. Another popular question that we got earlier today as well, and that came up during this conversation, is if we have any specific ideas about teaching adults who are English language learners. And this is always a really wonderful but challenging question, because you're dealing with people where literacy is a barrier and reading is a barrier. So my recommendation here is that structure and predictability is one of the key elements to helping set up our adult English language learners for success. And of course, you always get to pick the content through the TPACK lens. If your students are aware of 2 or 3 instructional strategies that you always use, so let's say in your class you frequently use 6-word story and 3 truths and a lie, but a very simplified version of it. For example, what picture is on my screen? Is it a cat, a dog, a bird, or an elephant? So it could be made as simple or as complicated as you like. And once people know how to answer a question or how to use an instructional strategy and interact with it, you can use the same shell, but swap out the content. And that way you're taking that barrier away from them and you're able to engage them, of course, at their own level. And you as the educator are best positioned to know what is going to be accessible to them in terms of their learning and what's going to be too much or not challenging enough. So I would really focus on making sure that you pick the right instructional strategy, because your content will come with your experience and with your directive. And then technology can sometimes enhance, but sometimes hinder. So as long as your focus is on the instructional strategy when you're dealing with adults who are English language learners, I find that sets up a situation where we have quite a lot of success. So some other questions we got. Okay, so how can I get students to actively participate in chats? You notice that what I tried to do was to give you time. And this is actually one of the most difficult skills that I had to develop as an educator. I am really uncomfortable still with silence. So pausing and just waiting for 30 to 40 seconds feels really weird to me, because I feel like because I'm a teacher, because I'm an educator, I have to fill the space. I have to talk. And through experience and trial and error, I found out that actually, if you want people to participate, you have to give them space and time to do it, or they won't. They'll just sit there, they'll passively listen or tune out. You want to build in small chunks of you talking. So let's say a couple of minutes of you explaining something, and then allow students the opportunity to answer a question or consider an anecdote or think about a joke or a quote that you share with them. But it has to be a back and forth. You have to give people an opportunity to engage with what you're saying and allow them the processing time. Very simple way to do this as well is just to have the questions prepared beforehand. And that way people will already come having thought of some of the answers or ideas that you want them to participate with. So the more prep you can have your students do before they come to the lesson or they partake in a real-time experience with you, the more success you'll see, because people are going to feel like they have thought about something thoroughly and they have something thoughtful to share. Mike, are you seeing any other questions that I'm missing right now? Any other things that are coming up?
I'm seeing some that deal with how do we help students address, the pandemic that are taking place. What are some strategies for that? I think for this is always for this is being transparent with it. I think one of the things too to make students understand and be honest with them is this is new to everyone. This is not something that's happened before. I think that the one thing that we talked about in the office hours with educators on a more personal note is to make sure that, hey, it's okay. Like we're trying to do this in an age or during a crisis. So it's okay to not have all the answers right now. It's okay to take things very slow. It takes a lot to produce an online course or move content online just in normal circumstances. So I think it's to say it's okay if I take this a little slow. Certainly there's pressures. There's pressures from school districts, from institutions, universities to move really fast. And I understand the move of fast, but just know that, hey, it's unprecedented. We want to help you with this. It's okay to take it a little slow and just to be honest with your students, like we're learning this, we're learning it together. It's a process we can go through. So if you're feeling bad, I've had a lot of conversations with educators like I'm at my wit's end, I'm feeling stressed, I'm overwhelmed. It's understandable. Just forgive yourself. I think one of the words an educator used recently was grace. Like it's okay to feel that way because this is unprecedented. It's okay to take things slow. It's okay to fail. When I taught, that was one of the things we always talked about was first attempt in learning. So it's okay to do that and be open with your students about that. So I've seen a lot of questions around that come in of how do you address this. I had a great conversation earlier tonight with students looking at how do they show what's happening in their own community. So there's a lot of projects that you can do around that. The project that came up tonight with an educator was they were looking at how to analyze the data and show that in perspective. Viruses have been with us, for all time, right? So viruses are not anything new, especially for younger students, to help them understand that this is something that one, never before have we had the technology to be able to combat it, to be able to get the word out, and then also never before have has this moved so fast where we've been able to, I think, communicate out of this is something that's happening. So I think talking about some of the good parts about it, we were able to contain it. Whereas if you look into the past, you go 50, 60, 100 years back, you can start to see the difference between the epidemics that have happened, the pandemics that have happened in the last 50, 60 years compared to ones that happened 100 years ago. Really help put that in perspective for students.
I just really encourage you to be mindful of the fact that as long as you have a simple approach to online teaching, especially if you're new at it, that's really important. So there's a lot of things that are happening, right? You've got to, all of a sudden, especially if you were a mainly face-to-face teacher, you've had to basically reshift everything that you do and go from a very comfortable environment where you had a lot of control and you knew how to do certain things, or you were getting very comfortable with it, to now maybe being in an online environment, which seems at first, like we said in the first instructional strategy, may seem impersonal, but it's a different medium to create relationships. And that's really what teaching boils down to, right? Is building relationships with learners. So how do we use the technology at our disposal to build meaningful relationships? Well, students, again, thrive on routine and predictability. If they know that lessons are going to be structured in a specific way and that they can look forward to being engaged in the learning, even though it's not face-to-face as it used to be, or that it is still online as it was, but it has a more engaging element to it, then you're definitely going to get better feedback. You work hard to put your lesson together to figure out what students are learning, so it might as well pay the dividends back by just using the best practices within the framework of that TPACK formula. Again, I really love using it because it's simple and it's easy to plan. I don't want to spend a lot of time, and then Mike had mentioned that you just got to sometimes just try things out and put yourself out there. And I've tried many different things. TPACK has proven to be kind of like a secure and safe method of getting content quickly, engaging, and then just making sure that what you would like to have achieved is achieved in the most engaging and efficient way.
Thank you very much, and hopefully we'll see you on office hours or another webinar soon.